Okay, so with me today I have James Krieger. James, how are you today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for taking the time to do this brief interview with me. Before we start, could you give us a brief introduction about yourself, like your background, what you currently do, and how you got involved in the fitness industry?
Yes, I have a master's degree in exercise science from Washington State University, and then I have a master's degree in nutrition from University of Florida. I've been involved in the fitness industry since the 90s. Uh, Basically start out. I got involved because when I first got into weight training in college, I was a very, very, very skinny guy. I mean, my dad used to say if I turned to the side, I'd disappear. I was this very, very skinny competitive swimmer in high school. And when I got into college, I wanted to bulk up some, so I started weight training and everything, and was really. I've always been a kind of a scientist at heart because my original background was computer science, and so I was really fascinated behind the science about the changes that were happening to me, and so that's kind of how I moved into that field. I was actually originally in computer science. I ended up changing majors and everything, and so that's kind of how I ended up in the exercise fitness field. And um, so after college, I got involved. Started out a little bit, or did publish some research. I published some research. Both my master's thesis at Washington State University was actually published in Journal of Applied Physiology, and then a project I did at University of Florida was published in American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. And after that, I got involved in an obesity management program for Microsoft employees, and I kind of became the head research guy for that. And I did that for quite a long time till the downturn in the market economy and everything. And then I had a slight career shift. I was still involved in the fitness industry, but for income, I was an analyst for a little while, and then now I actually day trade for a living. But I'm still very active in the fitness industry. I've been publishing a lot of research with Brad Schoenfeld and Alan and some other guys. Obviously, I've been giving talks at the Epic Fitness Summit. I'll be giving a talk in Australia this coming year, as well as in the UK, and then also obviously in Norway as well. So I'm still very, very involved in the fitness industry. Just now it's not my primary source of income, but it's still a definite passion of mine. So
And I know you do a lot of studies with Brad and Alan. And what's your role? They usually call you the stats guy.
yeah,
Yeah.
usually I'm the guy that runs the stats for all the studies. So actually, Brad just contacted me few days ago, and he's got another study in the works. He just finished data collection. He sent me the data, so I'll be running the stats for that study. Um, so yeah, I pretty much do all the statistics work for all the stuff that they've been doing.
Excellent. Do you compete as well in fitness?
So I did do my first competition in men's physique just recently. I just back in September, I did a local show here. Got second in the novice class at my local show. So that was my first time competing. If I ever do it again, I'm not sure. We'll see. I just did it. I did it for a number of reasons. I had gained a lot of body fat over the years, always trying to bulk up, but never really trying to lean out. And so it just kind of slowly accumulates over time. So I decided to do a show to really motivate me to get lean. I'd like to do a show again if I can add some more size, but we'll see. I'm 42 years old now, so I've been training for a while, and it's getting harder and harder to put size on. But we'll see. I got some ideas. I want to experiment with really high frequency training, um, kind of like what Menno does with some of his clients, and then who else does the high frequency training?
Børge also does high frequency
Yeah,
training. Børge
yeah,
Dagli. Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, because I've read some of his stuff. So
yeah.
um, And then based on Brad's recent work in that area too, so I decided, oh, I'll try experimenting with that. So we'll see where that goes.
Yep.
See how it does.
It's
So
it's actually based on a study from Norway. It's called the
yeah,
Norwegian Frequency Project.
yeah,
So I have one of the researchers that were involved in that study
yeah.
talking a bit more in depth about what they actually did. So it also will be published on my
Oh,
blog.
excellent,
Yeah.
excellent.
So that would be great. I also heard some rumors that you consumed a lot of Greek yogurt during your prep.
Yes. Yes, that was my staple. That was
Yeah.
my staple for, I mean, it was just easy. I mean, it was convenient, easy. It's really high in protein. Uh, um, I usually would mix a little, squirt like some Dasani or different types of flavoring in it, and then maybe add some berries, and it was actually really good. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I still eat a lot of it,
Yeah.
but it was definitely a staple for contest prep. That was for sure.
Yeah. It's better than chicken and rice and broccoli, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I still got the little sunken in look on my face, you know, from the contest. I'm maybe 3 pounds above my contest weight, so I want to fill my face out a little bit. I don't like that. I don't like that sunken in look on my face still. So it's going to take a little while to get that back. But
It's Christmas holidays now, so that
I know.
yeah. Okay, so let's jump into this. The topic for today is insulin, carbohydrates, and fat loss. And before we start to talk about this topic, could you just briefly tell us what insulin is and what its function is in the body?
Yeah, so insulin is a hormone produced by your pancreas, and its primary function is to control blood sugar. That's really its primary function, and it does that actually. You know, a lot of people say, well, it shuttles sugar into your cells, and that's true, but actually, the primary way it controls blood sugar is controlling the rate at which your liver produces glucose. So that's really the primary way um, it does that. And I've talked to people about this before, and there's actually some interesting papers on this. But you know, if you take an uncontrolled diabetic and let's say a type 1 diabetic doesn't take their insulin and their blood sugar starts skyrocketing, you know, a lot of people say, oh, it's because the sugar can't get in the cells. Well, they've done metabolic tracer studies and they found that that's not true. Sugar can get in the cells. But what happens is the liver, there's nothing to stop the liver from just producing massive amounts of glucose. So that's why the blood glucose climbs so high without any insulin. So really, you can think of insulin as a brake on your liver, helps slow down gluconeogenesis in your liver. But it does stimulate sugar uptake by muscle cells and fat cells and things as well. So those are the primary functions. And then it has some secondary functions. You know, it inhibits lipolysis, which is the breakdown of fats into fatty acids. And it also decreases the rate of fatty acid oxidation by both your muscle and liver. So those are a lot of the functions that it has.
Excellent. And that is also the reason why people often talk about insulin and carbohydrates in regards to fat loss, that you should keep your insulin in check and reduce the amount of carbohydrates that you eat, because if you have if you secrete a lot of insulin during a fat loss period, you won't lose any fat. Is that true or is it not true?
Yeah, that's what people, or that's what some people think, but no, that's not true. And you can, there's a lot of controlled studies actually in that area. Actually, one of the most recent ones was by oh, why can't I remember his name now? It was that metabolic ward study. I can't remember the name of the
Kevin Hall.
Kevin Hall. Yeah. So yeah, there was that recent study where they actually looked at insulin levels, and then they looked at changes in body fat and everything, and there was essentially no differences between the groups. Actually, the higher carb group, at least based on the metabolic data, lost a little bit more fat. But there's other studies along the same lines. There's a study all the way back in the late 80s or early 90s. Actually, it was 90s. I want to say it was 1996 or something. Gole is the name of the author, and it was a inpatient study. So they had very tight control over the subject's food, and they compared a low carb diet to a higher carb diet, and the protein intake was matched. And they looked at insulin levels and they looked at fat loss. And even though insulin levels were higher in the higher carb group, there was no difference in fat loss between the groups. So yes, insulin has impacts on fat metabolism, and the impacts are important, but that doesn't mean that you have to control your diet in a way to manipulate your insulin levels to try to lose fat. So
it's great that you also mention the low carb studies where they matched the protein intake, because that's usually a weakness in a lot of low carb studies, that they don't actually match the protein intake.
Yeah, that is a weakness. And then another weakness is a lot of them are based on self-report of food intake, or they're done in free living people. And the problem with that is, people don't do a very good job of telling you what they ate. And so it can look like low carb has an advantage because people sometimes have an easier time adhering to low carb, usually because the protein intake is higher. There's some other mechanisms as well, but and so you get these groups and they're reporting similar calorie intakes, but the low carb group loses more fat, and so everyone starts to say, oh, well, it must be due to the insulin. Well, no, it's not. It's because the low carb group are actually more accurately reporting their calorie intake because they have an easier time adhering to the diet, usually because of the higher protein intake. So.
And we also have populations in the world where they actually eat a lot of carbohydrates, where they don't have problems with, for example, obesity.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Do you remember how much of their diet is carbohydrates?
I don't remember. I'm trying to think of some of the populations, but there are some populations that are there's a few out there that are up to 70-80% carbohydrate. And I'm trying to remember the names of the populations, but that's really not important. The important fact is there are a number of high carb consuming populations that don't necessarily have the same obesity rates that the United States and other Western countries do. So.
Yeah. And I think also Stefan Guenet, he recently published an article where he actually showed that the carbohydrate intake in the United States has declined since 1999, but the rate of obesity still has gone up.
Yes, and the sugar intake has gone down as well, and because a lot of people have blamed sugar on obesity as well, and the total sugar intake has actually gone down, yet obesity has gone up with it. So,
but when we talk about insulin and fat loss, people seem to forget that there's also another macronutrient that also has effect on insulin secretion. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, protein actually has a powerful effect on insulin secretion, and in particular dairy protein, particular whey protein. So, for example, whey protein, there's whey protein, in fact, and a lot of people don't know this, whey protein will stimulate more insulin than white bread will. It is very insulinemic, and I find it kind of amusing that some of these people that avoid things like bread and other carbohydrates because they're concerned about insulin levels have no problems consuming whey protein, even though the whey protein is going to produce more insulin than the other foods that they're avoiding. So, and the reason dairy proteins in particular, like whey protein, produce so much insulin is mainly because they're high in the amino acid leucine, and leucine is a branched chain amino acid, and leucine actually will directly stimulate your pancreas to produce insulin. So the pancreas is not just responsive to glucose, it's also responsive to amino acids, in particular leucine. And so if you eat a protein that is very high in leucine, like whey protein, you get a pretty powerful secretion of insulin because of that. There's some other mechanisms as well. There's some impacts of proteins on gut hormones that actually then act as signals to stimulate your pancreas to produce insulin. Glucagon-like peptide 1, GLP-1, is one of those. and then GIP. I can't remember what GIP stands, gastro inhibitory peptide or something like that. I don't remember what it stands for, but um, um, those hormones, which are actually produced by your intestines, believe it or not, actually also interact with the pancreas and actually will actually enhance pancreatic insulin secretion. So insulin secretion is way more complicated than just changes in blood glucose, like a lot of people tend to, most people tend to way oversimplify it. So
And most people also think about insulin as negative hormone, that it doesn't have any positive effects. Like, for instance, does it have any positive effects if you exercise, for example?
well, yes, actually, well, one of the positive effects is actually what a lot of people don't realize is insulin is a satiety hormone. And we know that for a number of reasons. Number one, we know that if you take rodents and you knock out the insulin receptors in their brain, they will overeat, which means that when insulin binds to receptors in the brain, it actually helps stop you from eating. And then we also know from there's a meta-analysis out there on humans that shows that actually higher insulin levels after a meal are in fact associated with decreases in appetite rather than increases like some people seem to think. So insulin is certainly an important satiety-related hormone. It's also very important in relation to exercise. In terms of insulin, exercise enhances insulin sensitivity. So you get an enhancement of glucose uptake into muscle tissue. There's really a lot of positive impacts to insulin, and it's not this hormone that you somehow need to somehow manipulate or control through your diet. I'd be willing to bet a lot of people would probably be surprised. These people that try to manipulate their insulin would probably be surprised, depending on what type of foods they're eating, may have higher insulin levels than they think they do anyway. So.
But during the day, what happens with when you, for instance, when you eat a meal, you secrete insulin, especially
Yes.
if it has a lot of protein and a lot of carbohydrates, and then fat loss is inhibited, and that's where the theory comes from, that if you
Yeah.
eat foods that secrete a lot of insulin, you won't lose fat. But what happens during the day, like between meals? What happens then?
Well, yeah, and that's what happen. What really matters is what happens over 24 hours or over days, because yes, insulin inhibits the use of fat as a fuel. But that's because insulin basically reflects that you're in a fed state. I mean, anytime you're eating food, your body has no reason to tap into its fat stores, right? So insulin is just reflects that, okay, I've been fed. And so you get this it basically is a mechanism for your body to say, okay, well, we can inhibit breaking down fat and other things because we don't need the energy from those things. We've got it from our food right now. Well, 2-3 hours after a meal, insulin levels come back down, and then fat oxidation starts to increase, and until you eat another meal again. Well, what really happens is what happens to the net fat balance over a 24-hour period. Because remember, unless you're eating food all day long throughout the night, throughout the day, which you'd be overeating on calories anyway. I mean, we all go to sleep at night. And so all of us are having at least a 6 to 8 hour fasting period in and of itself. And so you have to add up what is the net impact over a 24-hour period, and not what is just happening in those 1 to 2 hour time frames after meals.
Excellent, and that's what a lot of people don't get, that the balance through the day, like the energy balance, is what's gonna decide if you gain weight, maintain your weight, or lose your weight. Not what happens if you eat a meal with a lot of carbohydrates and secrete a lot of insulin.
Yeah,
So it's
and
basically,
actually, I would add to that you could, let's say you eat a meal of almost purely fat, and fat really doesn't release much insulin. Well, you're still in a fed state. So what happens in that situation is, okay, insulin levels aren't going up, But what your body is going to do is it's just going to oxidize the fat that you just ate for energy, which means that any body fat you have is just going to stay where it's at. So, and there's actually research to show that when you get a big rise in free fatty acids in the blood, because let's say you ate just purely fat, like you ate a bunch of butter or something, that will also inhibit the release of fat from fat tissue, even though insulin levels aren't elevated. So your body has multiple mechanisms of sensing that you're fed. And I mean, it's because you just ate. It doesn't matter whether it was fat, protein, or carbohydrate. You just ate. And so your body has no reason to tap into its fat stores. And so that's why ultimately what matters is what happens over your energy balance over a 24-hour period.
Excellent. Okay, James, thank you so much for taking the time to do this brief interview on carbohydrates, insulin, and fat loss. I know you have a lot of articles on the internet. Could you tell us your name of your website and where people can find more information about yourself?
Yes, you can go to my website, Weightology. That's WEIGHTLOGY.net. I have a lot of free articles on there, and then I also have a it used to be a subscription-based service, kind of like Alan Aragon's Research Review. I had to discontinue it because I have I have a 1 and a 3-year-old now, and it just became too difficult to keep up on the articles. But you can, for a one-time fee, access all of the back content. There's about 3 or 4 years worth of back content that you can access for a one-time fee. And basically, what I did there was I reviewed a lot of research related to fat loss and exercise and nutrition. And I usually would review 4 studies per month. So if you're interested in looking at in more detail some of those reviews, you can definitely check out my website.
Excellent. I've actually read a lot of your articles, and they're really top notch. Especially I think you have an article series on equipment to measure body composition, where you talk about
Yes.
DEXA. Yeah, those are amazing. I usually hand them out to my students when they want to look at which body composition equipment are the best. And for example, I always tell them that all of them have some flaws.
Yeah,
So the
definitely.
most important thing is that you use something and you use it consistently over time.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, exactly.
Okay, James, thank you so much for taking the time, and have a great day. Hopefully we might do this again sometime on a different topic.
Yes, definitely. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.